All right, next we have a presentation by Westwood One, the powerhouse behind The Ben Shapiro Show, Talk is Jericho, and the newly launched Lemonada Media Podcast Network. Please join us in welcoming Westwood One's Suzanne Grimes and Kelli Hurley.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning. I'm Suzanne Grimes, and last year, Kelli and I presented at the IAB podcast Upfront for the first time, inspired by 90 million engaged podcast listeners and many of you in this room. With a stronghold in news and insights and nearly 40 million downloads per month, we announced at that time our all-in commitment to the podcast space. So here we are 1 year later. We've more than doubled in size, which makes us the largest or the fastest organically growing podcast network in the US, focusing on producing, distributing, marketing, and monetizing original high-quality content at scale. The voices and stories of America across all viewpoints and ideologies shape who we are, what we stand for, and where we're headed. Westwood One Podcast Network is where the conversation starts. So, what's next for all of us? Westwood One remains passionate about news and insights, which is more important than ever as we count down to the 2020 election, with new shows, growing audiences, and stunningly good ROI for our direct-to-consumer brands. And then beyond news and insights, we've expanded into 3 new content pillars that offer diverse, inclusive, and brand-safe environments for advertisers. And we're excited to share that with you today. The first is sports, where we bring a unique expertise to the table. At Westwood One, we have exclusive partnerships with iconic brands including the NFL, the NCAA, the Olympics, and the Masters. And so building on this strength, we've launched several new shows, including the Pat McAfee Show 2.0, which is a funny, irreverent, and authoritative podcast from former NFL Pro Bowler Pat McAfee, as well as Esports 30 with Kevin Naki, a behind-the-scenes news exploration featuring gaming legend and insider Kevin Naki. So that's the first, sports. The second is life and entertainment, anchored by our phenomenal partners at Lemonada Media, a women-founded podcast network for everyone who values the unfiltered human experience, from the opioid crisis to empathy building to good parenting. So here's their 2019 lineup. First, Last Day, which launched on September 25 and has already built tremendous buzz, reaching the top 10 in society and culture and ranking at the moment 58 in all categories across Apple Podcasts. The second is As Me with Sinead, dropping next week, which you'll hear more about firsthand in just a moment. And then Good Kids, How Not to Raise an Asshole, which is launching in November. Plus an aggressive slate of programming throughout 2020. Finally, the third pillar is Business, Money, and Tech, which is debuting today with Think About This, featuring inventor, tech expert, and business visionary Shelley Palmer, and Emmy and Peabody award-winning innovator Ross Martin, the first in a pipeline of new shows we'll be sharing with you in this category. At Westwood One, every voice matters, and each day we start and shape America's conversation.
Thanks, Suzanne. Now it's time to meet our panelists and get today's conversation started. So please join me on stage.
Hey, Dave. Good to see you. We're going to put you right next to Kelli. Welcome. Welcome. Yeah. Welcome.
Yeah. First up, we have Dave Rubin, an American political commentator, YouTube personality, and host of the wildly popular Rubin Report. Dave is a classical liberal in favor of same-sex marriage, criminal justice reform, marijuana legalization, and public schooling, to name a few. Dave's background as a stand-up comedian, degree in political science, and willingness to listen without fighting has uniquely positioned him to tackle big ideas and uncomfortable truths with thought leaders from both sides of the aisle. Next up, we have Chris Jericho, host of Talk is Jericho with more than 200 million downloads. In addition to being a world-class podcaster and wrestler, Chris fronts the heavy metal band Fozzy, is a 4-time New York Times selling author, and a former contestant on Dancing with the Stars. This year, Chris became the first ever all-elite wrestling world champion. You can catch Chris live tonight on TNT as the AEW star of Dynamite. Next, meet Stephanie Wittels-Wachs, co-founder and chief creative officer of Lemonada Media and host of Last Day. Stephanie is a best-selling author of the memoir Everything is Horrible and Wonderful, a tragicomic memoir of genius, heroin, love, and loss. And a well-known voice actor appearing in countless anime series and movies. Stephanie and her co-founder, Jessica, have a poignant and remarkable story to share with you today. Finally, meet writer, teacher, and disability activist, Sinead Burke. Next Thursday, she's launching As Me with Sinead, leading candid conversations with top celebrities on what it's like to be them. Sinead is using her platform to advocate for more inclusivity, especially within the world of fashion and design, where she's working with top brands like Gucci, Prada, and Burberry. Sinead was featured on the September cover of British Vogue magazine as a voice for change and attended the Met Gala, where she was the very first little person to walk the red carpet.
Okay, time to get started with our panel. We're honored and flattered to have you here. Dave, we're going to start with you. You've been labeled as a conservative talk show host, but you are so much more than that. As a gay married man living in America, tell us how your journey helped shape your voice.
As a gay married man, I'm
Yeah.
out there. That's where you guys are all supposed to applaud, right? Don't we get some extra credit for being gay? Isn't that how it works? We're coming for all your rights. Well, it's really interesting how I got into podcasting, because I kind of feel like an old veteran now. I started my show in September of 2015, which is not that long ago. It's a couple of years ago, but it feels like it's now existed for a long time because the technology has changed so quickly. And I remember when I started the show, the main reason that I did a long-form interview show was that everything was really getting smaller, right? It was when Vine was coming out and we were watching 6-second videos on loop, and Snapchat was happening, whatever the hell that is, I'm still not sure. And everything kept getting smaller, and I realized there's nobody really talking about ideas in a long way without basically the little version of what you can get on cable news on CNN or Fox, just watching people battle it out in 5-minute clips, and you have to be more over the top and crazy. And I thought, why don't I just sit down with people across the political aisle and across really every aisle? I mean, I talk to atheists, and I talk to evangelical Christians and Orthodox Jews, and I talk to straight people and gay people and black people and white people. And it's kind of funny because in a weird way that was sort of revolutionary at the time, which in a normal, healthy society it shouldn't be, but that's sort of where we're at the moment. And what I've tried to do is treat everybody with equal respect. So, I've had a couple of the Democratic candidates on. I've had Tulsi Gabbard and Marianne Williamson and Andrew Yang, and I treated them exactly the same way that I would, say, conservatives like Ben Shapiro or Dennis Prager. And just this morning as I was walking in, I actually got an email from Rudy Giuliani's comms guy, so we're going to have him on next week, and I'll treat him exactly the same way. And I find if you treat people with respect, you can get them to open up in a new way. And that actually is the cool thing about podcasting to me, is that you guys can all listen to these things in the subway. I always think this, I took the subway down this morning, that you never know what anyone's listening to on the subway. And we're supposed to look at everybody and think, oh, well, the way identity politics is sort of shaked out, that oh, this person is black, they should think this, or this person's Muslim, they should think this. And that's actually the reverse of how we should be treating each other. So I love the idea that there's so many people now on the New York City subway just listening to something, and it's like you have no idea what they think. And the fact that my show is part of helping shape that is pretty awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So, Chris, you are a world-class podcaster, rock star, internet breaker, championship wrestler. You've recorded over 600 shows. Tell us, how do you keep the show so sharp and maintain the incredible connection that you have with your audience?
Yeah, and I'm not a gay married man, but I am Canadian, so that checks one box there.
Oh.
Yeah. I think, much as what Dave was saying, the secret is the diversity of my show. It's not so much a wrestling show or a music show or a comic show. It's just an entertainment show, and I think I always wanted to kind of base it around the Johnny Carson concept where I would watch the Carson show because I loved Johnny Carson. I didn't care who the guest was. If it was a guest that I knew, I was into it. If I didn't know the guest, I would still watch and check it out. That's what I try and do with my show. Like she said, 600 episodes. I started in December of 13, so that was really far back in the podcast, Wild West. I was able to carve a niche audience out for myself. Now, here we are in 2019 with, I think, 750,000 podcasts or something along those lines. I was lucky enough to have a good fan base right from the start. And the reason why I was able to keep them is because people never know what they're going to hear on my show, who the guest is going to be, what the topic is going to be. I just want people to check it out knowing that if Jericho has this person on their show, we think we'll give it a try and we'll listen to it, whether it's someone we know like Mike Tyson or Dennis Miller or Chris Tucker, or whether it's my crazy friend from high school who used to give blowjobs to an icicle in Winnipeg, Canada, big, fat, 4-foot icicles. You get crazy people like that on, it's like, this is funny stuff. I think also, too, another thing that advertisers are just starting to discover is that we have a captive audience that aren't going anywhere. Like Dave was saying, people are listening in the subway, they're listening at the gym, they're listening in their cars. And that little 15-second wheel that forwards the ads, they don't use that on my show because I always tried to make the ads part of the show. I always wanted to make it so entertaining that goes back to the 50s when you would have the guys on the soapbox saying, here it is, the new cleanser from Tide. You really need to use this. I always wanted to make that part of the show so that the ads were just as exciting as the actual content itself. And I think now more and more advertisers are starting to understand the benefits of that. I've had some great advertisers over the last 6 years. Now we're starting to get more into the brands of the Burger Kings and McDonald's and Walgreens and that sort of the big entities that understand when they advertise on Talk is Jericho, everyone's listening, no one's turning the channel, and no one's fast forwarding. Did I make my 3 minutes?
You did, and there's a reason why your fans are as loyal as they are. Thank you so much.
Yes.
All right, Stephanie, you and your co-founder, Jess, who happens to be here in the front row, each lost a brother to opioid addiction. And so in searching for a way out of the grief, you met each other and embarked on a mission to create a more empathetic world. So tell us how that led to Lemonada Media.
Okay, so rewind to a year and a half ago. I was very pregnant, ridiculously pregnant, and I got this cold email from a woman who was an executive producer at Crooked Media. She said, hey, can we get on the phone? So we did, and we bonded instantly in the way that you do with someone with whom you shared the worst fucking thing that's ever happened to you. And I loved her instantly. And at the very end of the conversation, she slipped in, hey, I have this idea about a podcast about the opioid crisis. Do you want to do it with me? And I was like, no, I don't. I had already written a book about the loss of my brother, Harris Wittels, who is a comedian and Parks and Recreation, inventor of the word humble brag, shameless brag there. And, I'd grieved, and I was going to have the baby and move on to my happy place. That didn't happen because I read an article a few months later that opioids are killing more people now than car accidents. Wow. And I had this moment where I went, oh, this is larger than me. It's larger than Jess. We unfortunately have this life experience, and so many people do. 400,000 people have lost their lives to opioid overdoses since 1999. 400,000. In 2017, it was an NFL stadium's worth of people, 72,000 people. So we need to stop the bleeding. And I emailed her immediately. I said, let's do it. And we got to work on Last Day, where we zoom in on a person's last day of life. We retrace their steps and try to figure out how they got there and how we as a society are getting here. And it's been an incredible experience. And in doing it, we realized, you know what? People's lives suck in a variety of ways, not just this one. So what if we create content and community around all the things that make it hard to get out of bed in the morning? You know, the real shit that is going on with us. And so that's what Lemonada Media is. We are squeezing the ever-loving fuck out of life's lemons with humor when we can. And the response has been amazing. You know, people are wanting us to tell their stories. We've got As Me with Sinead, Good Kids, How Not to Raise an Asshole, which is your quasi-manual on not raising assholes. NFL star Michael Bennett and his wife Pele are joining us in January for a show about relationships and parenting and culture and everything. And again, you know, people are sending us these messages from all over the country. Thank you for telling my story. So many heart emojis. So we're going to keep going with that.
And you were just in Minneapolis on Monday night, was it? So Dave and Chris, you have audiences that you've built for quite a long time. Lemonada is starting from scratch, right? So you're reaching out in all kinds of different ways to connect. What happened on Monday?
We had a town hall, so a big part of last day is going into individual communities and figuring out how are you tackling the opioid crisis where you are. So we went to Hennepin County, we had the sheriff on, we had addiction specialists on, we had a woman in recovery, and we're going like, how are you cracking it here? Because we're so separated here that it's hard to know, you know? They're doing medically assisted treatment in their prisons. Which is phenomenal and unusual and fantastic. So we had a beautiful town hall. You know, you think you're out of emotions at some point, but of course at the end I'm standing up saying my brother's name, holding Jess's hand and weeping because it's intense and it's beautiful to be in the same room with people who are going through the same thing.
Sinead, hello. You are globally known and respected by millions for your ability to shine a light on the connection between design and humanity. How did this theme become your life's mission?
As a physically disabled woman, I'm a little person. I know.
I didn't know.
Right? Well, you wouldn't if you listened to my podcast. That's the power of it. But I have spent my whole life living in a world that was designed for you. And that part of feeling excluded meant that I had to rely on strangers and their individual kindness for my own independence, simply walking through the world. And that constant conversation of being vulnerable in public spaces with strangers has cultivated an empathy in me that in many ways I think is unparalleled. And it's also really taught me how in so many fields we find having human conversations really difficult. The classic example of when I realize that I'm a little person is in the grocery store. I'll be buying avocados, and a child will see me and say to their parent or adult, "Look, there's a little woman." And immediately what the adult does is shush the child and physically remove them. And they don't want to embarrass me, and they think it's a reflection of their parenting, but they have such reluctance to understand the things that they don't know or are fearful of. And for me, that's a microcosm of the world in general. How many things do we not initially have a conversation about because we either feel unqualified or we don't feel like we have the empathy or the vocabulary to do so? So when Lemonada Media got in touch and said, we're having a show about human conversations rooted in empathy, we think you're the right person to do it, I thought they were going to ask for my credit card details in the next email. It sounded too good to be true. And next Thursday, As Me with Sinead launches, where we're having extraordinary conversations with the people who you think you know, but actually you don't. The premise for the show is that we ask 4 questions. The first one is, how do you describe yourself personally and professionally? The second is, what's the monologue that exists within your mind? The third is, what's it like to live in your body? And the fourth is, what gives you hope? And then I just listen. Which means we have people like Victoria Beckham telling us that she instructs her daughter Harper that when she's in school, it's her only job is to include people in the playground, because when she was in school, she was always left out. We talk to people like Florence Welch, Hosier, Riz Ahmed, Jamie Lee Curtis, Reza Aslan, Kulap Vilaysack, and really reflecting the diversity of this country and this world in a way that's human. And because it's audio, you don't see what any of us looks like. So there's an ability to be intimate with important and challenging conversations in a way that just feels human. So if you haven't subscribed already, do.
And you've joined us from where? Did you in the last couple of days?
I just came from New Zealand, where I had the great privilege of spending some time with the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, who, when we talk about empathy and humanity, is one of the leaders within our global world who puts that first. And the idea of not just representing people. I spoke to her, and I imagine you saw when that terrible incident happened in Christchurch in New Zealand, and the Prime Minister did the press release wearing a hijab. And my first question to her was, how many people did you run that past? How many people's insight did you get to make that decision? She said, none. She said, I knew that it was a moment of trauma and I knew that it was a moment of crisis, and all I wanted to do was help be comforting. So I rang a friend and said, I'm going to Christchurch. Do you have something that I can wear? And she said, I just wanted to make them feel seen and heard and be human. I think that's something we forget.
Yeah, extraordinary. So we have very limited time, as you know, but I hope this gives you a little sense of the extraordinary voices that we have here and across our platform. We're honored to be with you today. Thank you for joining us. And before we go, I want to remind you of one last thing, which is this: our commitment to providing data and insights to help you prove the value of your investment in podcasting. This morning, we released the third biannual Westwood One podcast download report. It's available to anyone who's interested on westwood1.com. You can access that today. So in closing, as the largest audio network in America, we look forward to continuing the conversation with you. Thanks so much.
One of the themes we talk about here at the Rubin Report is why it's so important to judge people as individuals and not as a collective.
Is it hot? No, it actually feels good, but this conversation is smoking! Oh, a little bit of the bubbly.
Hello, beautiful human. You clicked on our conversation with Ariana Grande, Sierra, Ellie Goulding, Blackpink, Billie Eilish, Joe, Kevin, and Nick Jonas.
All right. You need to give yourself that amount of credit, like you would with anyone that you might attempt to care for and love.
My vision for the future is a world where inclusion and diversity will not be a talking point. It will not be a subject for debate. It will just be our reality.